G'day mates, it's B-Buster here, and I would like to give Cerebral a shout out for sponsoring this episode. So, mental health, it's an incredibly important topic. And did you know that last year, rates of anxiety and depression doubled in the US? And with therapy visits costing over $100 per session, in my mind the system just isn't keeping pace with the needs of our communities. But enter in Cerebral. Cerebral is an online mental health service that offers prescription medication, counseling, and therapy for anxiety, depression, ADHD, insomnia, and more. I know from personal experience with family members the difference that therapy can make for the lives of others. The quest for self-improvement is a steep one, but it's well worth the effort. In fact, it's really commendable to receive a helping hand in order to work at being the best version of yourself you can be. And with Cerebral, you can make that step today. With Cerebral, you can connect with your counselor and therapist on your own schedule through your laptop or through your Cerebral mobile app. You can schedule sessions based on what's most convenient for you. You don't have to wait weeks to be seen. The treatments are affordable at only 1/3 of the traditional price, and for listeners of this program, you can receive 65% off your first month of medication management and care counseling at getcerebral.com/bescaredpod. You don't have to wait weeks to be seen. The treatments are affordable at only 1/3 of the traditional price, and for listeners of this program, you can receive 65% off your first month of medication management and care counseling at getcerebral.com/bescaredpod. Go to getcerebral.com/bescaredpod for 65% off your first month. That's just a total of $30 to get started. Join Cerebral today on their mission to make quality mental health care accessible and affordable for all. So, I, a 21-year-old female, had a pretty scary experience with my husband. This happened about a year and a half ago, I think now. And I've always been a huge paranormal fanatic. I would always find places to go explore that were known to be haunted, which means that I do have a lot of stories, but this one is by far the most scary. In my home state, there's this abandoned asylum on the outskirts of downtown in a pretty sketchy area. The building was originally a mental health facility in the 40s, and was eventually made into a drug rehab center, and finally a boys' home where it would eventually shut down in the 80s. It's a relatively small building, I suppose. Only 2 stories, and maybe 8 rooms on each floor, and 1 large room on both floors on the far side of the building. All the windows are busted out. But the building has a history filled with tragedy and has a well-known reputation of being haunted. Now, I've been to the building on a handful of occasions, but had never been on the bottom floor due to flooding. I had never had any experiences there, except maybe a feeling of unease, I suppose. It was a day that I had asked my husband if we could go. He was hesitant at first, as we had been there a few months before. We usually went every 6 months just for fun. But he eventually agreed and said that he wanted to go at 3 a.m. And me being me, I agreed with him. So, 2 a.m. rolls around and we're at the asylum with our baseball bats, for protection. As I mentioned, it's a bit of a sketchy area and occasionally we would run into homeless people sleeping there, so it was just a precaution. I also had brought a Ouija board and an EMF reader. This time that we visited, the water at the bottom floor had drained out and I was very excited to finally go down there and explore it a bit. We started upstairs and swept the whole building, making sure that nobody was there, of course. While sweeping the bottom floor, I didn't have any feelings of unease, but I was a little bit freaked out to see satanic symbols and dead birds on the floor. At this point, I'd figured the downstairs hadn't been flooded for a few months, as there was a lot of graffiti and the dirt on the floor was very dry as well. We started on the upstairs with candles and the Ouija board, and tried to make contact for nearly an hour, but there was nothing. Nothing on the EMF, nothing from the board. At this point, my husband and I were just sort of messing around because we weren't expecting anything to happen, to be honest, just having fun. We moved downstairs, and by that time it must have been about 3 a.m. I was feeling fine at first too, and we did a few sessions on the Ouija board in different areas of the lower floor. I had asked to stay away from the large back room, as the satanic symbols had made me feel a bit uncomfortable, I guess. After the sessions, we walked around with the EMF detector, and I noticed that it was only spiking in the spots that we had the Ouija board sitting. My husband and I were pretty weirded out by that, but we just kind of blew it off and thought that there was maybe an explanation and we'd figure it out later. And it was at this point that my husband decided that he wanted to go to the back room. I said that it was fine as long as he stayed close to me, and we made a little more than maybe halfway when I just started to get this gut feeling to not go any further. Every hair on my body was standing on end, and I told my husband that we needed to go, and I noticed that he was on edge as well. I ended up running down the hall back to the outside, alone, and that was really unlike me, to go anywhere alone in the dark, as I'm terrified of it, but this feeling was just too much for me. When my husband and I were both back in the car and I calmed down, he explained to me that he had felt the most evil feeling that he'd ever felt since a previous haunting he'd dealt with. We were both pretty freaked out, and we decided that we were done for the night and we just wanted to go home. Now, it must have been about 3 nights later. I had woken up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. When I was coming back from the bathroom, I had a really weird feeling, but I wasn't completely awake, so I just sort of ignored it. When I reached the bedroom and closed the door behind me, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I looked over to the corner of the room and I saw a hunched shadow figure, not much taller than like 5.5 feet. I stared for a second, sort of trying to adjust my eyesight, but eventually I just told myself that I was half asleep and I must be sort of seeing things, and went back to bed feeling a little uneasy. Now, it was about a week later when my husband asked to talk to me, and he told me that he had seen something in the bedroom that night that I'd gotten up to use the bathroom as I'd woken him up getting out of bed. He began describing what he saw, and I was in utter disbelief because we had both seen the exact same thing. Needless to say, we were both pretty scared after that, and I think our fear fed more into the situation. It went to us seeing the figure almost every other night, to our ankles being grabbed and things being moved around and found out of place for the next few weeks. There came a point too when I was so fed up with everything that I smudged with 2 different smudge sticks and very angrily told it to leave us alone. And after that, it just went away, gone, like it never even happened. To this day, I believe that it followed us home from the asylum that night, as we've never had issues in our house before and always left the Ouija board in the car. I had a strict rule about it coming into the house. And to this day, we have not returned to that asylum either. Even thinking about it over a year later, I can still feel the pit in my stomach of when I felt the evil that we experienced that night. So, I'm an only child, and it must have been about, 6 in the morning. It was on a Sunday, though, and I was in my living room watching cartoons with both my parents asleep, when I hear a knock at the door. It was a pretty Latina woman in her 30s holding a large cardboard box. I'd never seen her before. There's a big white van pulled up in the street in front of my house with a man in the driver's seat. She told me the box is for my parents and asked if they were home. I told her yes, but they're asleep. She said, "Oh, that's okay. I can come back later." But that she had something for me too, and it's in the car. She asks if I could come help her get it out. And I'm lucky, I guess, because I just started kindergarten and we had just had the stranger danger talk just a couple of days before this. I told her, maybe later when my parents are awake. Bye. And I shut the door on her face. Immediately I told my parents and, well, they didn't believe me. A couple of years later, I told them the exact same story and they realized then that I didn't make it up. To this day, they have no idea who that woman could be based on my description. My dad had a pretty bad addiction at that time and hung out with a lot of questionable people, so I wonder if word spread around that he had a daughter, or that maybe someone had just happened to notice by watching the house or something. I guess I'll never know, but thankfully they never came back. So earlier today, I wanted to get out of the house a bit. It's been raining here for like almost a week off and on, and so once I saw that it was going to be sunny, I decided that we should go to the beach. I left my phone behind, which isn't unusual for me because I have a bad habit of dropping it at the beach or on hikes. We got to the beach and park, and I see a dog in a car parked near us, and I call to my girlfriend to show her. As she approaches, her phone rings, and I see on the caller ID my name and number. She asks if I accidentally pocket dialed her, and instinctively I sort of reached for my heaviest pocket, which had my wallet in it. But I reached and I remembered that I left my phone. I stop cold and tell her my phone is on the couch at home, and she picks up and hears a deep voice speaking through static. I have a pretty deep voice, but she told me that she couldn't really tell who it was or what it was saying before it hung up. She calls back and it rings twice and goes to voicemail. Now, I'm pretty freaked out by this because, you see, when we first met years ago, I had just moved to this town, and I swear that I saw myself on the street jogging. I ended up chasing this person but couldn't catch them. I kept yelling, trying to get their attention, but they just kept going, putting more and more distance between us. I stopped and some nearby people commented on my twin that I was racing. This further cemented what I saw that day, and it 100% was me that I was chasing. And now this? And when we got home, my call log, it didn't have a history of a call outgoing. But also, it didn't have the call she returned either, which was definitely my phone. I have no idea what's going on. I'm pretty freaked out by all of this, but if you have any thoughts on this or anything else, then I would love to hear it. Has anyone had any experiences like this? About 10 years ago, I was on my way to work and made my usual stop at the Speedway to grab a Red Bull. I made this stop pretty much every day, so it was routine for me. On this day, however, I was already about 15 minutes late for work, but whipped into the gas station anyway. As I got out, there was clearly a strung-out girl pacing by the entrance with a baby stroller. I assumed this lady was going to approach me when I got out of the car to ask for money to buy food or something. The Midwest is filled with dope heads, so I braced myself for the awkward encounter and I headed in. What happened instead, though, is that the lady bolted in front of me with her flip phone and stroller in hand and started begging me for a ride up the road. Initially I declined, but she just would not stop pestering me. I got past her, buy my Red Bull, and I head to the car, and as I get to my car, she reappears from behind my car and starts begging again. This time she flashes a photo of her baby on her phone and tells me that she just needs to be dropped off up the road. I eventually go, screw it. I'm already late for work anyway. So she hops in the back seat with her now clearly empty stroller and instructs me to drive towards the bypass, close to my work. As we drive, she keeps telling me to just go straight, every time I ask how much further it is. We're now well away from the city, and it's all country roads. I eventually lose my patience and very firmly tell her that she needs to either give me an address or get out of the car. She throws $3 into my passenger seat and begs me to just turn onto this random gravel road. I turn down it, and I instantly notice that the only thing on the road is a beat-up vehicle blocking half the gravel path. And at that, I instantly pull off the side and tell her to get the heck out now. She begs to just take her down to this vehicle because it's her boyfriend and he has her kid. I tell her that if that's true, then he can drive down the road and pick her up. She texted on her phone for a second, and without another word, she just hops out. I'm officially sketched out, and I flip when I just see in the rearview mirror this vehicle hauling its butt behind me. The lady is now gone and turning onto the bypass opposite me. I ended up calling in since I was running about 30 minutes late after everything anyway. But I'm 100% certain that I was about to be robbed by crackheads, or maybe even worse. Between the fake baby photo, the empty stroller, and the shady dirt road, and the vehicle that was just sitting there, I was pretty shook for a good week. I grew up in Australia, and when I was in high school, I used to get the bus home from school every day. The bus stop was about a 10-minute walk from my house. I did this walk every afternoon by myself, and it was always quiet. I remember this day vividly. It was 2009, and I was 13 or 14 years old. I can't remember what time of the year it was that it happened, but I was in year 8 in high school. I got off the bus, and there was this tall, dark-haired man wearing a grey trench coat. I think that he was also wearing makeup, maybe, standing at the bus stop when I got off. I thought to myself that, man, he looked creepy, and it was strange that I'd never seen him before. He smiled at me, and I put my music on through my earbuds and began walking home like any other day. But when I walked down the alleyway to my street, I started to get this weird sense like something was wrong. So I turned my music down, and I could hear loud footsteps behind me. I was too scared to turn around, so I just started walking faster. But when I finally did turn around, it was the same creepy dark-haired man from the bus stop. I felt my stomach drop, and he was about 5 meters away from me now, and he yelled something out to me, but I couldn't quite understand it. He either yelled, "I'm going to rip you," or "I'm going to get you," or something like that really loudly. But I sprinted home in shock, and I didn't turn back. I eventually lost the guy, but man, it was a creepy experience, that's for sure. The song playing through my earbuds while I was running home was Ready or Not, and I'm 25 years old now, female, and whenever I hear that song, it always haunts me. So this story takes place in North Italy back in 2014. It was early September, and a friend of mine asked me to make a short hike in the woods near his town, and I agreed since I love hiking. We prepared our backpacks, grabbed some food, and we drove to the place. My friend knew the area pretty well, so we didn't take a map or anything. We also didn't have flashlights because we only planned to return to the car in like a few hours, and in early September, daylight lasts pretty long here, so there was really no need for it. As we went deeper into the woods, we saw beautiful spots, small rivers, a pair of caves that we explored. They were small and had only like one big chamber, but we had lunch and proceeded to sort of follow a trail in a deeply wooded area. After around half an hour, I would say, we were at that point around 50 minutes away from the car since we'd stopped so many times to snap photos or explore areas. We arrived at a pretty large clearing. Now, in that clearing, there were a bunch of around maybe 4 or 5 people, normally dressed. They were just talking and laughing and stuff. There was really nothing suspicious about them either. Just super ordinary people like me and my friend talking to each other. They obviously saw us too, since the clearing had no trees or rocks to cover the view, and we couldn't avoid that, since the trail, after a deep curve, immediately ends into the clearing, proceeding to the other side of it. So we said, once approaching them, since they were in the middle of the track, "Hey there, what's up?" But they didn't answer back and just sort of started to stare at us without saying a single word. This obviously launched a huge red flag in my mind. We stopped too, and I looked at my friend. He looked back at me, concerned. We said again, "Hey," but there was no answer. I started to feel uneasy, so we decided to return back to the car at this point. But soon after we headed back, we realized that they started to follow us. As we noticed it, we yelled, "Why are you following us? Did we do something wrong?" Yeah, we were young and pretty stupid. In these kinds of situations, it's often run immediately and get out of there if people act like this. But again, there was no answer. Obviously, we proceeded to walk faster and tried to get off the trail. It was a pretty dumb choice, but again, my friend did know the area pretty well. But they were always around at maybe a 15-meter distance. We started to panic at this, so we looked again at each other and agreed to get out of there quickly. And as soon as we began to run, we heard them start to run too. This obviously really freaked us out, and we did our best to put some distance between us and them. Another thing that made me panic though was the fact that we were, as said, around 40 minutes away from the car at that point, in a very isolated area, so I thought that we pretty much had no hope. At some point or another too, when we were about maybe halfway back, we noticed that they weren't behind us anymore. We thought that maybe, and luckily, we managed to lose them or something on our track. The area, as we said, is pretty heavily wooded and has plenty of slopes, so it's pretty easy to get lost if you're not used to it. Plus, we took an off-trail way that my friend knew. We hid behind a thick bush though, and we decided to try and listen for a bit. There was nothing but silence. No footsteps, no voices. Keep in mind too that even when they were following us, they didn't say a single word. So we took a deep breath and we managed to return to the car eventually, trying our best to be as silent as we could. Upon getting to the car too, we just threw everything in the back, jumped in, and we raced out of there as quickly as we could. But it doesn't end here, because as we left the woods on the main road, we saw coming from a secondary road another car behind us. It was definitely them, and they were following us again. We were positive too that it was the same people because, 1, they were basically tailgating us. 2, the area is very rarely visited and there were absolutely 0 cars except for my friend's one, and 3, their car, it had no plates. We drove to my friend's town, avoiding going to his house obviously, taking every country road and every turn that we made. They did as well. As we reached the town square, they made a U-turn though and returned back to the wooded direction that they came from. Obviously though, we were absolutely terrified, and we immediately called the police and informed them as we approached the town square and as they approached us, since me and my friend were basically crying as we got out of the car at this point, to check that area out, but there was no evidence of activity in the following hours. They never did show up again anymore in the following days, but we became really paranoid. For like weeks on end, we refused to leave our houses. And this is exactly why I've taken a break from hiking for about 4 years now. I have no idea who they were and why they acted like they did, but that experience, it definitely left me with a pretty big scar.